We are fortunate to open this historic virtual conference with an accomplished leader. Lisa Harrington is the CEO and founder of Abiding Strategy, a leadership consulting practice. As a strategy coach, Lisa helps professionals deliver better results by increasing their understanding of the human equation. Lisa believes that we can all help create a better world by being better as leaders. Like all of you, I am seeking a better world. So it is my privilege to introduce to you our opening keynote speaker, Lisa Harrington.
Good morning and welcome to the first ever virtual Venue Connect meeting. I'm so excited to be here with you as your opening keynote. We know that this has been a crazy time, and so we thought it would be helpful to talk to you today about how to lead in a crisis like this, how to recognize the problems, and how to come out better on the other side of this crazy time that we're in. We want to help you to get through this and to thrive and not just survive. And that's part of what I'll be talking to you about today. So as we move forward in the presentation, you'll see pictures of animals. This is just for fun, just something to make you smile, some of my animals over the years. And you'll see that they are very relaxed most of the time, like my cat Sadie here. She is a demonstration of the good kind of stress. Stress is important to us, but we have to manage stress differently in a crisis, which is part of what we want to cover today. But all stress isn't bad. If we didn't have some stress in our lives, we'd be jelly. We would be too relaxed. We would never get anything done. We would have no motivation. And all stress creates different reactions in the body that we think will be helpful to you to learn today and to understand the difference between good stress and bad stress and why stress is always going to apply, even when it's a fun thing that's going on in your life, even when you're getting married or having children or going on a vacation. Some stress will still create that anxiety in you, even when it's from a positive thing. And then that changes, of course, when we're in a crazy time like we're in now, when we have pandemics and other crises. The secret is to manage the stress in a way that helps you to grow and to get better, and to also remember that, like all crises, this too will pass. If I can leave you with anything comforting today, that's the first thing to remember. This will pass. All crises are temporary. That's why they're called crises. And so we can get through this together. We can get through this by helping each other, by paying attention to what's going on in our offices, in our families, with our staff. How do we communicate through this crisis? How do we get things done despite and in spite of the times that we're living in right now? And then, like Sadie here on the stairs, we can relax, we can get our sleep and our rest, and we can enjoy life no matter what circumstances we're in. Now, stress is not a one-time event, although there are certainly one-time events that will cause stress to pop up. If you have a family member in the hospital, if you have a wedding, if you have a baby coming, if you have a vacation you're planning and something went wrong, that temporary stress can be a problem. One-time events are common, and we understand that. There are often ongoing and relentless stresses in our lives. We have everything from health issues, cancer, parents dying, children having trouble in school, all these ongoing, relentless things that just keep pressing on us that we have to deal with. And sometimes these things are overlooked. We don't recognize them as sources of stress, and so we don't always take the action we need to help ourselves through that crazy time. And then, of course, can anybody say pandemic? When we first had this pandemic come upon us, we had no idea what was going to happen. And one of the first stages we went through was what we call anticipatory grief. It's a fairly new thing that we're talking about in the coaching world, about this idea that we didn't really know how it was going to end. We were anticipating the grief, but we didn't really know how it was going to be handled. We didn't know how long it would take. Nothing really was helping us to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Well, we still don't really know, But now we have made some progress. We know how to cure it. We know how to fix it. We know how to prevent some things. We know, despite all the political stuff that's adding stress to this, we do have some answers now. But we're a long way from being through it. And so today is all about how do we recognize the issues that might be affecting us? How do we see that as leaders, both in ourselves and for our team? How do we help them to be motivated and stay happy? And the first advice that I'd like to give you is not to be an ostrich. You guys have heard that story, right? About how ostriches, when they're threatened, they stick their head in the sand and they ignore it and pretend it will just go away. Well, we can't do that here. Your industry is so critical to the recovery of this country. The idea of having a place to gather, being able to get together again, to see that coming in the future and have great venues in which to have those great gatherings, to be able to talk to people again, to hug people again, that is going to cure us. That will heal us of the crisis that we've experienced. And you are the ones that will have those places available when we get through this. So we want to make sure that you're aware and that you have what you need to build upon the solutions that have been coming. The first thing to do, though, is to recognize the problem. Recognize what it's doing to you, what it looks like to others, what would you need to look for in others to see if maybe your team members are struggling somehow. How can you do that when they're remote? There's lots of things to talk about today, but the first is recognition. What does it look like for you and for others? Shock, denial, disbelief, difficulty concentrating, having anxiety and fear, being guilty. Oh, maybe you feel guilty because you or your family is able to continue to work, or you do still have an income coming and when you know others don't. Or maybe you feel guilty because no one in your family has been sick. We call that survivor's guilt. Maybe you feel like you need to withdraw from others because you're so worried about everything and you don't want to bring anybody down. Maybe you're sad. Maybe, like a friend of mine, you cried a lot at the beginning because it was such a big unknown. Maybe you just got numb, which is common when we're dealing with grief and crisis and stress. And people can see that in you, and you can see that in your employees. You can see that in the people around you when it looks like that, when you can tell they just can't seem to concentrate anymore. It feels like fatigue, nightmares, physical manifestations of being startled easily because you feel the threat all the time. Again, difficulty concentrating. Maybe your heart pounds sometimes. Maybe you're edgy or agitated. Maybe you even get aches and pains that can be a manifestation of the muscle tension that comes with stress. Has anyone felt any of these things? Have you had a day like this, or a week, or a month? Because all of us are feeling this. This is going to affect everyone. And you'll notice that on the slide before, difficulty concentrating is on both slides. It's what it feels like and it's how it looks. It's the quickest way to recognize that someone you're leading, somebody in your family, somebody on your staff, they're having a problem because you can tell because they're not concentrating, okay? They miss words, or they don't hear you, or they're startled easily. That's a concentration issue. That leads us to some understanding of how our brain works. If we can understand why this happens, then it's much easier to cure this. And the first and most important thing is to know that you're not alone. You have all of your fellow peers and employees right here at IAVM. You have each other. You have others in the industry. But not only that, you have everyone on the planet. We literally all are going through these phases of stress. You know, you could say misery loves company. But really, knowing that we're in it together is a really good way to help you get through it. Knowing we're all in the same storm, even if we're not all in the same boat. Our ancient brains do this to us. They cause this stress. This brain piece back here, right at the back of your head, where it connects to your spine, is called the amygdala. And it's our ancient brain. It was the first thing that developed as human beings were becoming human beings. And those parts of our brain are all about survival. It's not about thinking or logic. It's about that gut reaction, that survival, quote, of the fittest, right? You've heard that phrase, I'm sure. And that part of our brain will always override everything else because it's about survival, because it's about continuing the human race on this planet. And an easy relationship to make there is if you were walking through your yard, let's say, maybe you're doing yard work one day, you're walking across the yard, and you see a snake, and your immediate reaction is to jump back. Oh my goodness, there's a snake, right? And then you look again, oh, that's just a garden hose. It's okay. The reason that happens is that your neocortex comes in second. Your ancient brain, the amygdala, sees what looks like a threat and jumps first and thinks later. It's the fight or flight reaction that you're probably very familiar with. Well, right now, we are all constantly feeling like we're under threat. And because we're all feeling it all the time, and because normally things don't last this long, and because normally it is just a snake you jump from or a spider web you walk through and you jump away, but then you're fine, our ancient brains are not used to this. They are not accustomed to being in this state of threat for so long. And that leads us to some challenges that we need to know how to cover. Button had an easy solution when he saw a snake. He just ran up that tree. He was right away from that snake. All animals have an amygdala. So that is that instinctual part of us that takes over sometimes. And so if we can know that that neocortex, which is here, the front of our brain is where we need to push things, take the reaction, make sure you're safe. But knowing now that we're safe at home, we're safe in masks, we're safe in certain circumstances, knowing that we're safe online instead of in person, we can take a breath and push from the amygdala back here to the frontal cortex so that we can then take care of others. One of the ways we have described this in the past is related to Maslow's pyramid. You may have heard of Maslow. Abraham Maslow had this theory that we have to take care of all of our physical and emotional needs first, and then we can help others. So that's almost like pushing it from the amygdala into our frontal lobe and realizing what we can do to help others and how we can get through this on a logical, linear type basis instead of with that fear and instinct and that threat feeling that we have when we rely on our instinct. So as you heal, as you recognize this, as you feel better about how we're handling all these circumstances, as you start to plan for the future, which you can be doing right now, as you start to think about where will we be in a year or 2 years or 5, how might I adjust things, you'll push all your reactions into the front of your brain, and that way you can help heal others. You can be with your team. You can stay sharp. We can teach you how to stay grounded so that you can take care of your team, so that you can take care of your family. And you know what? Sometimes showing a little vulnerability, letting the team know that you're feeling the stress. I don't like this either. I'm struggling a little bit too. Let's have a little bit of a round robin via Zoom or have some phone calls to talk to each other and have a minute to find out what they need and to share what you need as a manager, as a leader, as the owner. You can show that stress affects everyone, that they're not alone either, that you can lead them through, and then you get a little bit of a venting time and they get to hear that, oh, even the boss sometimes has stress. It's important that they understand that so they can heal and realize that they can do all these things that I'm about to show you as they recognize that we are just doing what humans do because life moved too fast for us. If you consider the last 200 years in our country, really in the world, versus the millennia that this earth has been forming, you would understand why our brains haven't really totally evolved yet, and why instinct keeps taking over. And when you understand this, it kind of helps, I think, to realize that, hey, it's not just me. Hey, I'm not to blame for this. I don't have to be the one to take the blame for this. We used to live in tribes of 20 to 40 people. Whatever you think of was the caveman times. We were not going around the world and in communication with 8 billion other people. We only had to deal with 20 to 40 people at a time. Their problems, their emotions, feeding them, housing them, keeping them warm. Well, evolution in our bodies didn't keep up with evolution of technology. Our brains didn't have time to adjust to what this is that we're dealing with today, literally this kind of technology, this kind of activity, this kind of connectivity between so many other people. Our brains couldn't keep up with that. We moved a little faster than we really maybe should have, but that's okay because we have ways to handle it and deal with it and to take care of our team. As they recognize this, as you recognize this, we can make this work for us as a planet, as a species, as human beings. This is going to be fine because we know what to do. Oops, sorry. We think as coaches, as psychologists, as folks that are in this business, casual students of the brain as I am, 30 plus years in the executive ranks, helping to manage people, we see this all the time, not on this long-term basis, but stress happens. You move offices, or you fire somebody, or you hire somebody, or you've got somebody that needs training, or you have someone who's having a crisis at home and you're dealing with that at work with them. Well, some of the things that you can do to help people through long-term stress are all the same things that you can do with those short-term issues. Good managers know that healthy people will perform better. Well, when we're stressed like this, we know we need to stay healthy. We need to keep moving. We need to do all those things that in good times and in bad times, keep our bodies healthy, keep our brains alert. But the number one thing right now that we're seeing a need for, because of the long-term pandemic, because people are stuck at home, is this idea of continuing to move. Find a way to get your exercise in. Some people kind of got depressed and they said, oh, I'll just sit on the couch till this is over. Well, that was okay when it was only going to be 2 or 4 weeks, but it's 7 months now. It's not okay anymore. We have to keep moving and get our bodies back to where they were, get in shape again, those sorts of things. Because that oxygen that comes with the blood flow is great for your brain. It's not just about the physical body. It's not about looking good. It's not about muscle tone, although those are all wonderful things. But for the purposes of managing our stress, we need that blood flow for the oxygen to get into our brains. Now, I want to mention Gabby. He was my horse who was skin and bones when I rescued him. And Gabby lived to be 37 years old because he got good food, and good exercise, and lots of fresh grass and hay. And we, like horses, just need that basic care to be able to manage our stress. And then to take it to the next level, how do you help the people that work for you? That's all about communication. We need to be overly transparent. We have to really talk about everything that's going on and say it over and over and over. Why? Well, because in good times, it takes 7 repetitions for someone to move something from their conscious brain to their unconscious brain and create a habit, create a memory. Well, now that we have pandemic time and all the other things that are going on in the world, we have to over communicate because it might take twice that many times of repetition. Because remember, we said difficulty concentrating was one of the big issues. Well, everybody's having difficulty concentrating. So over communicating, being overly transparent, saying what you need to say it again, make sure they heard you, get an acknowledgement. Things that are great communication skills in good times are also great communication skills in bad times. The second step here is not to isolate yourself or allow your other folks that work with you to be isolated. Please reach out in whatever way works for you. As you can see here, we have Zeke, our puppy, and Yoda, the kitten. They did not know they were a dog and a cat. They loved each other their whole lives. They certainly did not isolate from each other. We should do that too. We should be sure we're connected to other human beings, especially if you're single and you live alone, or your family is not living close to you. Make sure that you're not isolating yourself for too long. Even an introvert needs that human connection. Even an introvert needs to know that someone else in the world is looking out for them. The third step for grounding ourselves in stress and helping with self-care is to regulate your nervous system. And this is for both you and your team and your family. This is for anybody who's under stress. The idea of bringing in enough oxygen cannot be overstated. And there are two methods that I just love for this. I open all of my CEO group meetings with this practice the pause idea, where we sit up very straight and we get our posture nice and aligned, put both feet on the floor, not crossed legs or crossed ankles. And then we close our eyes and we take deep breaths together. Maybe you could try that with me right now. We'll just do a couple, okay? Nice, sit up straight, feet on the floor, close your eyes, and breathe deeply. I promise if you do that 10 times every day, either before or after a known stressful circumstance, then you will definitely feel a little buzz of that oxygen that comes back through your brain and your body. You will feel more grounded, more light in your heart, and clear in your head. The other one is called the Yahweh breath, and this one is because the name of God couldn't be spoken in ancient cultures, they would breathe in and out the name of God. So they would say, Yahweh, and just in and out that name of God. Whatever works for you to make you feel comfortable with the deep breaths and the deep breathing, that's what I would ask that you try it, experiment, think about it, do it as a group, do it as a family. Make sure that those shallow stress breaths are cleared out occasionally. Clear the CO2 out of your system and get lots of oxygen. We also can use sensory input to calm ourselves. We can pet a cat or a dog. That is known to reduce blood pressure. Did you know that? Petting a cat reduces blood pressure. Having the sensory input of cookies baking, or one of those candle melting wax things that has cookie scent or vanilla. If you want to be energized, you might use lemon. That's all very real advice for stress management. And then staying grounded, meaning sitting up straight and having good chairs all the time, and also meaning put your bare feet on the earth sometimes. It's very helpful for your body. And the most important piece to this particular slide is feeling what you feel when you feel it. Leaders tend to hold back. Leaders tend to look strong even when they feel terrible. They feel like they need to be on this pedestal and be the best and the strongest and the fastest. And you know what? If you're doing that to yourself, you might get more and more unhealthy, and then you're no good to anyone. So I ask you, please, when you're feeling bad, if you have to get out of the office and take a walk around the block, or get out of your house away from the Zoom camera and walk around the block, or go and pound the pillow in your bedroom, let the feelings out so that you don't end up encapsulating them in your body, and then they come out at some very inopportune time when you weren't expecting it. Allow it to happen naturally and in a more controlled environment. You'll be healthier in the end for it. Self-care is not selfish. It's very important you understand that. Getting enough sleep is critical. You can actually die from lack of sleep. And I know with anxiety, we get nervous, we get worried, and we can't sleep. We need to not drink too much. I know that most people during this COVID time have imbibed a little more, but maybe take some time off from that occasionally, eat right, Do the relaxation breathing techniques, whatever your spiritual practice is. Don't let it slip just because we're not together in a synagogue or a church or a temple. Please take care of those sides of you so that you can then take care of others. If you have managed the stress and you're feeling better, you will communicate better. Remember, we said earlier you have to communicate more. Well, there's an old UCLA study, I want to say 70s or 80s probably, where they talked about the difference between visual language, vocal language, and verbal language. And the idea was that body language is very, very important to the communication that you're having with another person. Specifically, your body language tells a story that they will see even if your words don't match. Now, probably most of you have studied this. Well, we're not dealing with the normal conference where we're across the room with somebody or across the table, are we? We're not dealing with that right now. We're dealing with this Zoom camera thing. We're dealing with only seeing from the top up and knowing they're probably in their shorts and flip-flops from the bottom down, right? We're maybe not even talking as much to get the sound and tone of voice, what we call the vocal element that's a big part of the communication message. We're doing more email. We're doing more texting. We're doing more IMing and messaging and all the other things we do that you don't even get the sound of the voice. You don't get the comfort of that human spirit coming across. You've only got the words. And choosing the words is important. Being careful with the word choice is important. But right now, taking a minute to see the people on Zoom, even though it's not the same as being in person, it's very helpful. The technology sometimes makes us not want to do that. But it helps us to relax, to know that other people are really there. And tone of voice will get tight when we're stressed. Have you ever had somebody close to you say, "What's going on today? Why are you feeling bad?" And you'll say, "Oh, no, I'm fine, I'm fine." Well, they've heard it in your voice somehow. They've seen it in the hunch of your shoulders because you're not really standing up and presenting yourself, or they've heard that little bit of a different grating in your voice. They'll know because they know you. Stress will do that to us. One of the things you can do to fix it is breathe a little more deeply, because that loosens the chest capacity and it allows you to speak normally. One of the things is just knowing that it's okay to say, "Yeah, I'm pretty stressed today, but I'll be fine. It's going to be fine." And then just take a moment with other people and look them right in the eye. Even on Zoom, you can really look them in the eye if you want to, if you try. Now, we know that when we're physically with someone within about 36 inches, there's actually a different chemical that's released in our brain because we are herd animals. We are meant to be together. And so our bodies react physically when we're together. We don't get that when we're on Zoom, but what little you get of that with family members, cherish it. Do what you can to be with people physically so that your brain gets that release, a little bit of extra stimulation that we get because we're herd animals and because we like to be together. Now, I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on TV. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you're a bit younger than I am, but it's an old line from a TV show, TV commercial. Sometimes this goes on too long. Sometimes someone feels bad for too long. And I'm a coach, but I'm not a therapist. And so when you recognize any of these symptoms in yourself or in your team, please get a professional therapist or counselor involved, because if someone just can't stop the nightmares, or they can't get that sense of peace back even for a little bit in their lives, or they're afraid to go out even a little bit, even with the protections, if their families say, "Oh, we just can't, we don't see the normal you for so long now, it's been weeks and weeks," that's a time I ask you, please talk to someone about your employee program that you have. Most people have an employee assistance program through their health insurance at some level. Try to get that done for someone if this goes on too long, if there's absolutely no sense of relief, because they may need some professional help. Now, there is some change you're going to have to make in every organization, really in the world, has had to make some change, right? There are things that we are never going to be able to do the same way again, or maybe years and years. So how do we move through change and get our businesses back where they need to be? Well, that's what I call acing the change, right? We have to accept what the world has handed us. This is the deck of cards we've been handed. We have to work within that. And so while we would stick closely to our vision and our values, maintaining our integrity, working through a new mission statement, or changing or pivoting what we do in our business, how we provide the services we provide, like 4 people to a banquet table instead of 8. Those kinds of simple changes that help get us safely through this, you have to accept that. The very first thing here is just accept that this is how it is going to be. I admit I did not accept this well at the beginning. I wasn't happy with not being with people. I like to be in front of other humans, and this was tough for me. So I think all of us have a different element of this that's a problem for you or for me, for everyone. So try to just accept. Also include others in whatever changes you have to make so they can accept and buy into whatever it is you're doing. Never give up who you are. Never give up your values, your legacy you want to leave, and your vision. Those things have to stay pretty solid for you to continue successfully. And then all the best practices that you would ever use as a venue manager, you use them now. Maybe they're changed, but the concepts of best practices are good in the good times and they're good in the bad times. In fact, there's a quote from Henry Ford that I like. He said, "In good times, people do business with friends. And in bad times, people do business with friends. Make friends." It's one of the keys to maintaining your success. And so all those best practices, including making friends, maintaining that is really important to the long-term success. And then finally, exploring. Let's have fun with this since we're stuck with it. Why not make the best of it? Is there something fun you can do via Zoom with your team or your customers or your vendors? I have 2 vendors that work with me who are doing cooking events on Zoom. They're going to have a chef come in and show us how to cook something, and we're all going to have our little computers up in our kitchens. Another customer of mine is having a drink event with their customers. They're going to send the ingredients for mojitos, and we're all going to make mojitos on Zoom and then have a little happy hour together. There's got to be 1,000 ways to do that, and help your team to help you. Let them see that you understand we need to do these new fun things, and let them get creative and give them a new project to work on for these sorts of things. It'll motivate them. It'll make them happy to be involved. It'll make them happy that we're at least doing something, moving forward in our life. Also, there are some great books out there. I've read all of these, and they're just amazing. SB21 is one we'll get into in a minute. We're going to talk about her 9 steps. We have Purpose-Driven Life, Any Spiritual Text, The 7 Habits is a great older book. Power of Positive Thinking is from the 1950s, but it applies right now today. It's wonderful. There's some articles from Health Guide that I've actually included some of their information in our session today. I kind of like my book. It's all about animals and leadership. And then Fortitude by Dan Crenshaw talks a lot about how to get through the tough times. Really some great stuff out there that you could have your team reading and then sharing with everybody. Maybe everybody reads a chapter, and once a month you get online on Zoom and you summarize the chapters together. Whatever it takes to keep everyone focused forward and into the positive of what we're going to be encountering next. Now, the 9 steps come from Cindy Wigglesworth's book, the SQ21, and she talks about these steps being the way to stop yourself from being too self-centered in a conversation, which comes from the amygdala and the threat and the instinct for survival. So sometimes when we react to something and we know we have just done that in a bad way, maybe we snap at someone because we don't like how they're doing something because of stress. We're not quite in a position to handle it the best way, the most mature way. Maybe we're thinking only of ourselves. It's always not our fault. Sometimes our old ancient brain has kicked in and says that person is a threat or what they're doing is a threat, and we're going to jump in on that. And her first piece of advice is stop and breathe. Stop and breathe. Think about what you say before you're going to say it. Your grandma might have told you to count to 10 or something, right, before you react. Those things matter, but they matter more right now because we have been under this stress for so very long. Then asking for help, taking a minute to say, hey, friends, who can help me with this situation because I'm not handling it very well? Maybe you need to just take a look at yourself. Maybe you need to identify the things that are getting in your way for being the person you know you should be in a non-stressful time. There are root causes sometimes for these ego concerns she gets very well into in the book. I love this idea of reframing the situation. How can we look at something in a new way with fresh eyes and think of it from another direction, put another frame around it? How do we do that so that we can handle it better and get through the crisis better and not snap at an employee or yell at your dog or whatever when that stress happens? All these steps, you take a moment, and you can go through these, and some of them in seconds, and some of them are really long assignments that you may have to focus on yourself and make a long list of what you're grateful for, and how do I intelligently respond to this situation? And some things is just stop and breathe. Every situation will be a little different and need a little different set of steps, but they're very healthy responses to these situations where you know you're not acting as yourself. You kind of know why that's happening, and you want to get to your higher self, that top of the Maslow's pyramid, that idea that you can now take care of yourself so that you can take care of others around you. We'll be taking questions in a few minutes. This is Caleb enjoying the sunshine. And there will be a survey sent to you to rate the session. Thank you so much for your attention. Godspeed.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. Lisa, I just wanted to say thank you very much. We truly appreciate on behalf of IVM and obviously the entire industry as a whole for coming in during a time where we needed someone with your level of experience and background to share with us, how leaders, giving them the tools as in regards to how do you lead in the midst of crisis. And we know, Lisa, that at some point, in every leader's career, they're going to be faced with crisis, as in this case with COVID-19, the pandemic, a situation obviously that has affected and has plagued, pun intended, the entire industry globally. But whatever the circumstance, a crisis is a time of intense difficulty, as you have mentioned. There's a lot of stress involved, as we have seen. Complexity is involved, and there's never one perfect way to remedy that problem. No easy path toward recovery. It can be a challenge. But when crisis strikes, to your point, and I think you've said it best, Lisa, we tend to respond sometimes instinctively, but those initial impulses may not be especially productive. And hence is why we felt that you could share your level of expertise and give us kind of the pathways to how to navigate through these challenging times. And through our committees and our entire membership, we've been able to do that effectively with some over 7,000 members that even through the tension and all of the challenging times and all the pain points, they have really come in front of the industry, and not just within the venues, but cultural properties, faith-based, collectively working with the federal government. All of these folks have really come out in front of the industry. And I just want to thank you for joining us today. And at this time, I would like to open it up for Q&A. So first of all, for those of you that weren't able to see because of the buffering, setbacks, we're going to be more than happy to provide the recorded version. I believe Amy, our director of marketing, is going to push that out through the newsletter. So just as a reminder that you will have access to it. And I will just say that the comments coming through have been really great. Wonderful session, Lisa. All right, so I'll share some of those comments with you. If anyone has any questions, please include them in the chat and I will share them with Lisa. So, or just simply raise your hand. Any questions? Okay, here we go, Lisa. First question. How can we do some group activities to help our staff reduce stress?
That's a great question, especially right now with Zoom. It's so difficult to think about group activities at all. But we have learned that people like to just be together. So common methodologies is to say, have an open hour, to tell people to come and talk about the challenges they're having with each other. I've seen companies break out their employees into small groups and ask them to do tiger teams or chat sessions with each other once a week, having someone read a book and then do the chapters like we talked about in the presentation. That's a great way to do it. Also, talk about things that are not about work. Let people have that common time that they used to be able to discuss personal life in the kitchen. On the way to a meeting, they could chat about the weekend, having coffee in the mornings before the day starts. We aren't doing that when we're distant like this. And that's a stress reliever, just the idea that there are other humans in the world that are dealing with their own problems and their own issues. This is something that we can do even by Zoom. It has to be a little more structured. There's a little more going on with it. Of course, it's a little more difficult, but we can have that time and plan it and structure it so that we can have a moment with each other and relieve some of that stress. This is Pearl. She wanted to say hello. I hope you don't mind. Any other follow-ups to that, Mark?
No, Lisa, thank you. Couldn't agree with you. Couldn't agree with you more. Let's go to the second question. I have another question here.
We also have Hannah raising her hand. So
Anybody raising their hand here? I don't.
Hannah Lowney. Did you put it in the chat, Hannah?
Okay. Question number 2, Lisa. Are there better types of movement or exercises for reducing stress?
Well, so that's a very, very individual process, but I will walk you through a couple of the things that are important about it. So, for example, my own story is that I used to have horses and I was a horseback rider and I loved to be out with my horses. And if you ride, you know you're not really just sitting. It's a lot of exercise and a lot of work. But around the same time in my life, I was taking golf lessons because it was sort of expected in the industry I was in. And that created more stress. And what I don't want you to do, I quit the golf because it was so much more stressful. I'd rather be on my horse. I sold everything. I bought a new saddle and away we went. But so be careful that you're not participating in activities that are uncomfortable for you or that create more stress. Right now, especially what we're looking for is stress relief. So if it challenges your brain and it makes you happier to go learn how to play golf, then great. But if that's a stress for you like it was for me, then take something else. Go swimming, go horseback riding. You also have to think about your physical health and whether or not you're able to do the things. There was some talk during the beginning of the pandemic that everybody should go learn a new thing and get a new hobby and glam up and all these other things. And the problem with that is we were dealing with enough at that time when everything was kind of going crazy at the beginning. So pick something that will be relaxing while it keeps you moving. So it can be as simple as walking, jumping in the pool if you've got one. It can be as simple as dancing with your partner around the living room. That's okay too. Turn on some great music and just move. Just be sure that it's not something that's creating a different or additional level of stress, and you should be fine.
Thanks, Lisa. Question from Hannah Lowney. Great question. Lisa, do you have any advice for how to get leadership on board with efforts to stop, breathe, and for taking time? And I think you kind of mentioned it just now, for fun and connection when they're bogged down with keeping an organization running.
Okay, so a couple of points there. It's a great question, Hannah. Thank you. If you can't convince them, introduce them to me by email and I can send studies that will show them, prove to them why structured play in the workplace makes a company more profitable. And there's a few details about that I can share here. If human beings, being herd animals, do not have an outlet to be together, they will make one. So this is why the negative behavior in the workplace around the water cooler and the gossip starts, because we need it. We need to be together as humans. And so it's more productive for the company if time is set aside for that play, and it's structured and organized in such a way that people have that need fulfilled. And then when they go back to their desk or their work, they are more productive. Generally, it costs a few dollars on one side, of course. You're busy running the company, you're worried about money, there's not much revenue, you can do lots of things that are virtually free. But you'll gain more on the other side because of the level of productivity and the reduction of stress in employees. There are some studies that have said, and they're not very large empirical studies, but just some small casual stuff that's been done to say that that structured play, because it reduces stress, allows people to work harder and better and have fewer sick days. You probably have all heard the joke that somebody says, well, I'm just going to call in for a mental health day, or I'm going to take a wellness day. I'm not really sick, but I just need a minute. This sort of activity that's structured and during the work hours can eliminate some of that. The other thing that I'll say about the structured play is that you don't necessarily need to have your boss saying that we're all going to get together. You could say, let's all grab coffee 15 minutes before the workday starts. And that can be unofficial and off the books before the time cards get punched and all that. But you are being a leader then, even if that's not in your title. Thank you, Hannah, for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. And thank you, Lisa. Another great question by Cheyenne McMichael. Lisa, how do you recommend gaining motivation for employees who are not used to these slow times? That's question one. And how are they used to, how do you get used to being on the go all the time? In other words, you really never shut down, right? You go, go, go. And at the same time, you're trying to keep your employees engaged and motivated the entire time.
Right. And it's really a two-part question, I think, isn't it? This is about slow times where you want people to be productive and helping with the company's work, but you're not out running big events at your venues. I understand. That's where the idea of training and education has really blown up during this pandemic. People are buying into more webinar series, more live speaker series, more conferences like this one. So while the employees are a little bit twiddling their thumbs, we're getting them moved forward and into the future with their education. Challenges like get another certification, take 5 more classes this year than you would have normally. Some subscription-based educational programs are available out there where you can say, it used to be called Linda via LinkedIn. I'm not sure if that's still the name, where you could subscribe and people could take X number of classes per day. Having your employees teach something is a big way to keep them engaged and motivated. If someone has a particular skill in your office and you have consistently rewarded them for this wonderful thing that they do, maybe have them write a class and teach it via Zoom to everyone else. It keeps them busy, it documents their methodology and their process, and it helps them be encouraged by the fact that they have this skill that you want them to share. That's another thing that is just the book reading that we talked about and sharing the chapters, but when you have somebody teaching something that they've been rewarded for and that you know is excellent, it motivates them and it shows the rest of the team that they can ask for help from other people. My number one advice to managers and leaders who are so busy that they feel like they never stop, which was, I think, the second part of your question. I say that the idea of problems coming to you needs to be reversed. Tell your folks, and have some conversations around this, tell your folks that you don't want them to bring you problems anymore unless they're also bringing you 3 solutions. They're going to have to choose the solutions or decide to write the check. It may or may not be appropriate in your situation. But if they're bringing you a problem, they need to get in the habit of bringing you a solution along with it. If you want a resource for this, there's an old Harvard Business Review article called "Who's Got the Monkey?" If you haven't read it, it's worth getting out. It might be worth reading again if you have. And it talks about how to keep all the problems from coming to managers and start empowering your people to create the solutions. So I think start there. And as always, you're welcome to reach out to me, Lisa@abidingstrategy.com, if you need more information.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And that was an absolutely great question. Another good question coming in, Michael McCall. So Lisa, as we reopen our offices, we have times where certain employees are more comfortable with returning to work than others. There may be a disconnect for those who have never left the venue during these times versus those that have been working from home and are just now coming back. What do you recommend for helping find a balance between those two groups, as well as help to avoid resentment building from those who have never slowed down in correlation to those who are just returning? And that's Michael McCall. Great question.
It's a great question, Michael. Thank you. We are seeing this. I'm a Vistage chair and I coach CEOs, and we're seeing this question a lot right now because everyone isn't comfortable coming back. Some people have comorbidities that they're worried about, or they have health issues, or they have family with health issues. And each situation is going to be very unique. And I think there needs to be individual conversation. Several of my clients have set up surveys of some kind to send out to their team so they have documented empirical data to work with, especially if it's a larger company, as to what the percentages are, maybe even by department, of who's coming back and who's not. That understanding that you care as a manager, that you are allowing for their health, it creates a loyalty that you can't buy. So while it's frustrating and while it can be seen as resentful, which I'll talk about here in a minute, the idea that you care enough to ask, that you care enough to allow people to have that, really sends a very, very strong message. You will engender that loyalty for a very long time. Now, the ones that have never gotten to leave, or that have doubled up because they stayed and somebody else had to go home and that sort of thing, they need to see that the others are still working even though that they're home. They need to understand what the duties are that the people behind the screen have been doing and what weight have they been carrying while these other folks have had to be live and in person. So if there is a way to have some sort of report out each week, adding a meeting is tough, I understand that, but maybe it can be 10 minutes at the end of each meeting you're already having. Maybe you extend a meeting that's already on the calendar a little bit and allow the people from home to share their good results. This will help both parties. This will help the people that are at home feeling frustrated because they can't be there live. Most of them are not, we know, sitting back and twiddling their thumbs. We know they're trying really hard to contribute. I would say 95% of people are frustrated by the fact they can't be with their team. They can't help because they have to stay home. And there's a personal stress, a personal psychology that goes around that. We call it, I think I mentioned survivor's guilt in one case, but there's also that feeling of helplessness when you do have a health issue that keeps you away, and then your worth starts to shrink. And your feeling of self-worth starts to shrink. So by allowing them to report out their results to the team as a whole, even if they have to do it by Zoom, and giving them some of the kudos and the high fives, starting every meeting with recognition of those things, can make a huge difference in everyone's attitude about it.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. Great question. And to complement that question, Aaron Jepson, just to follow up, in addition to people returning to work after working from home, some are returning after being furloughed or laid off, which really adds an entirely new layer of stress to all of this. And then returning to the office after not knowing where your future was going to land would be very strange. So being able to cope and deal with that when the future is still not quite predictable, and pretty unclear, as Melinda Landry indicated. So can you elaborate on that?
Sure. The ones coming back to work from furlough will need a little bit of an orientation again. So talk to the groups coming back from furlough about what's happened while they've been gone. Most companies are not communicating with the people on furlough during the furlough. Most of the time, it's kind of all hands on deck just to keep it going, and they haven't been doing that. And in some cases, it's not even appropriate. But once they're home or back to work from furlough, then have a little mini orientation and have a summary of some kind that helps them to see where we stand now, what we're doing, and maybe what the alternatives are for the future. We know that this is not over, but we know it will end. So the alternatives are not black or white. We can't do that. But we can say, if it ends in 6 months, this is the direction we'll go. And if we have a vaccine out to everyone in 12 months, this is the direction we'll go. And start plotting and planning some of those. The other thing is, let the people on furlough jump right back in. Give them something to do as soon as possible that's significant and part of the team, so they can feel connected again.
You know, and that's a good point. First of all, that was a great question, and that's a good point. And you know, a great example of that is we had some really great leadership, obviously through Brad Main, our president and CEO, that really allowed us to get out, you know, in front of the industry. Let us do what we do best as a team, as an IAVM team, and continue to provide that support. And that was, it really made it easy for us to do our jobs and to do them effectively. So I totally agree there. And Blake Groves recommended a great book to consider under these times is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Right. I'll subscribe, Blake. Thank you for that. Another question. Lisa, how do I talk to someone if they're showing signs of stress and don't seem to realize it?
Well, there are a lot of folks out there that are trying to be strong for everyone else. I'm one of those types. And there is a tendency to not recognize the impact of the stress on themselves. And so what we try to do is help them become aware without having them raise that defensive shield that says, I'm okay, just leave me alone. And in most cases, at least the ones I'm familiar with, the reason we don't want you to crack that seam open is because we're afraid once we let go into the stress, we won't get it back. We will be seen as strong again. And so the conversations have to be around questions and around visible behavior. So when you know that someone is holding back from allowing the stress to come out of them, if you're afraid they're bottling it up, maybe you know that they haven't done the things that we are teaching about relieving the stress, start with a series of questions. Just how are you isn't quite enough, but it's how you could open. And then say, how's the family? And then maybe say, how is it going with XYZ project? And see if you can't lead them to an admission that they're going to need some help. The other thing that's important is to say to someone, can I talk to you about my situation? And would you listen for me about my situation? And give them that sense that they're helping, but also that they're not the only ones feeling vulnerable. Sometimes someone strong needs to know that others are also struggling, so they don't feel alone or as if they're going to be punished or attacked for the fact that they're not strong for a minute or that they need the help. And don't push, don't be impatient. This is an ongoing conversation that you just continually check in with everyone. And for the ones that resist the admission of having some stress, the ones that are holding it all in, you may have to push a little harder, ask a few more questions, and be sure they know that it's okay. Sometimes we think it's not okay to say I need help because then maybe I'll be the next one they're gonna furlough if I say I need help. That's a problem. We have to let them know that it's okay if you say you need some help, as long as the job gets done. We aren't in the moment planning any further furloughs. You can't make promises. There's all kinds of HR rules around that, but just keep the dialogue open and make sure they know the resources there if they need it.
Thank you, Lisa. And just to follow up on that, what can I do? What can we do to teach this to our team? And maybe you answered it, but can you elaborate on that as well?
Well, you kind of answered it too. Obviously, sharing my video. once you guys share it is fine. That's fine to do. There are many books, some of which I mentioned, many others out there. Calling your health insurance company and talking to them about what is available for employee assistance programs, and just sharing that information. Just make sure that the employees know there is something where they can talk to a counselor if they need it. The fact that you have the fact that you care enough to actually share that information is a big part of it. So anything you can do to communicate and over communicate and be transparent is going to solve a lot of this.
Thank you, Lisa. Tammy Sweeney made a really good comment too that I want to share with you, and that is, really hoping that strides made during COVID reference the blended workplace and the ability to work from home continue post-COVID. We have to accept that great work can be done remotely. It's a different way of working and not a bad way of working. I think that's attributed to shifting during the current health pandemic and how we're able to shift and find new ways of actually becoming more productive within the workplace. But can you elaborate on that as well?
Sure. We did a study at Vistage. Every so often they do what they call a CEO confidence index, and we always do it minimum of quarterly. We've been doing it a little more often lately, and we just got a report from the September survey that they did that 6% of American small businesses, which is defined as 20 million and under, are not ever going back to the office. They've decided to permanently go remote. And I thought that was a significant number. I don't know about you guys, but after just 7 months, we have 6% of the small businesses saying, yeah, we don't need to go back to the office. We're going to give up paying rent. We're going to let everybody stay home, and we will, when needed, come together. Even physically, they're going to do meetings physically together and rent conference room space, that sort of thing, and or do their meetings by Zoom now. So we've learned a whole lot, years worth of data now on productivity in the office when remote versus when sitting physically in the office. There's a downside though, you guys, and I want to make sure that you know that. When we are home and alone and isolated and not going into the office at all, we don't have those outlets that I talked about earlier, about being able to stand around the coffee machine and talk about how the weekend was, or when your child broke his arm and what happened, and getting that time for somebody to give you the hug and be sympathetic. So there needs to be some structure around the physical meetings, around the team building that is done. If you stay remote, it's a different way to manage, but you can't let that sort of thing just slip away, or you'll end up with other problems.
Thank you, Lisa. Nick Zazel also echoed what Tammy had said, hoping that too. From a leadership perspective, there's leaders are recognizing and knowing and understanding now that hybrid teams, per Nick Zazel, hybrid teams and schedules are the future of our industry. This is an opportunity for us to really look at what we're expecting from our teammates and determine what was essential to be done on site. And when we were saying people had to be there simply because that's the way we've done it before, giving people an opportunity to come back and maintain better personal balance they may have been found during this time. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. As long as we structure the process and think of it as a new way to lead and manage, it can certainly be done. The hybrid idea is interesting. Maybe everybody doesn't work from home all the time. I think, I'm going by memory here, but I think about 17% of American small businesses who answered the survey said they are planning to do some hybrid stuff. So the idea of teleworking has changed from we won't ever, old school, to, hey, let's do more of it, but let's do it in a carefully structured way. And I think that's the most valuable, because if they can work this blended work-life balance, we rarely say work-life balance anymore now. We say work-life blend, because we're all holding these phone devices in our hands and working all the time anymore, which has been the major problem in this pandemic, working from home, because we never stop. We work 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We're not walking down the hall to get coffee. It's just right there in our kitchen. We have we have less of that camaraderie, but we also have less of the physical breaks. We're just working so much because we're there at our desk and maybe didn't have anything else to do. But this idea of the hybrid workplace is giving us data about productivity that would have taken us years to do. And so as you can gather that data and figure out how can your ROI really go up by adding more teleworking time, making a hybrid situation, you should have less resistance than ever at this point, because the businesses that are doing well and that have survived have all been doing it from their home desks. So.
Thanks, Nick and Lisa, for elaborating on that. And Christopher Tubilowitz also, he agrees, but says that the blended and work from home poses unique challenges for managers as we are swirling around in the discussions. Manager and supervisor training programs specific to those environments should be a part of moving forward with those models. I couldn't agree more. Lisa?
Yeah, there's a lot of material coming out now about how to manage a remote workforce. And it is, in one way, very good because you're tracking now the results of the activity instead of the person, whether you like them or don't like them. The human element has gone away because the only way to track somebody now is by their results. You might be able to have them log into the computer and punch a time clock, but it's not the same.
President and CEO.
So if we have a time clock punched at work and they leave their desk, you know they're not at their desk. If you have a time clock punched at home, it's less likely that you're going to realize that they've stepped away, slipped away, or have funny cat videos on their other screen, right? You don't really know that. So you have to track the results, which is something I've been saying from my soapbox for 20 years, the whole time I've been doing keynotes. We should track results anyway. It should be about how accomplished is the person. And so using that data now, figuring out how that works now is going to be very helpful to the bottom line, frankly, as we move forward. I think you're muted, Mark.
I'm sorry, I've done this 100 times and I knew this was going to happen. So
every time, everyone has one.
Yeah. My apologies. So not a question, but a comment, but maybe you can elaborate on it as well, which I wholeheartedly agree with this. Diligent communication will help employees feel connected and valued. That's from Deborah Justice. And I agree, communication is very critical and it's key in the midst of transitioning from normal operations to, as a leader, to something that's of crisis, where now you have to kind of shift the methodology and the method in which you lead your teams. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I will say, to take it a step further, communication and over communication has been the hallmark of my consulting and coaching practice forever. It's the first chapter of my book, talks about communication. So in my world, working with CEOs mostly, I have two missions. I want to reduce their stress and I want to help them communicate better. And the reason that they're so tightly connected is because they're so tightly connected. Stress comes with poor communication. Less stress comes with better communication. And communication comes in so many ways now. We need to standardize some of that stuff. We need to think about how we're saying the words we say. And we need to tell everybody everything 3 or 4 times. There's some studies that say a person has to hear a message 7 times before it moves from the frontal lobe into the rear of the brain, where they have it as, quote, subconscious. If they're learning a lesson about something, it has to come in. Some studies have said it takes 21 communications. When I do value studies, we communicate and we pick those words that you want the values to be in your company. And then we use those words over and over and over in your newsletters. So your point about over communicating is valid all the time, not just when we're in transition.
Thank you. And then Giles Bouchard echoed that as well. Communication is the key. When staff do not know what is going on, they will always assume the worst. Open and honest communication will alleviate stress. That was Giles. Thank you. That's a great comment. Lisa?
Absolutely true. And one of the things that I learned the hard way, if you know there's a situation happening in your office that is going to be a little bit flammable, And yet you have to keep it confidential. It's better to say to the company or to your employees who ask directly, at least, look, there's something going on. It's going to be fine. I can't talk about it. It's just not appropriate for me to talk to you about this situation with another employee. I wouldn't talk about you to someone either. And so give me a couple of days. And here's where setting expectations is so important. I have an acronym that I like to use. It's CREW, C-R-E-W. And I say clarify, reward, engage, and then win. And the clarify part is really important. If people know what to expect, if they are clear and you are clear on what's going to be happening, they can live with some of those things you can't talk about. But please, when you know there's something that the rumor mill has gotten a hold of, get with someone and say, sometimes you go to the person who's the most gossipy in your organization, and you say, hey, everything's going to be fine by Friday at 3. Everyone will know what's going on by then, just to calm the situation without revealing any of their confidential details.
Thanks, Lisa. And great question from Megan Mensink. Lisa, are you aware of trainings and or books that speak specifically to supervising and managing employees remotely?
I have some. I don't have the names memorized. I'd be glad to send those either to you, Mark, or they can email me for the list. I've got 3 or 4 that we've used at Vistage about working remote that I'll be glad to send you.
Perfect, thank you. And then a comment from Daniel Huerta. He's one of our valued members as well. Great session, exceptional questions and comments. He had indicated it will never be business as usual again. So in essence, we're going to have to adapt to the environment, and we're going to make it a lot better than what it was.
Need to ace the change. Yes.
Absolutely. I believe I'm double checking. Oh, here we go. So Jamie Marino, do you have any suggestions to balance over communication with Zoom fatigue? We've been finding our team members are less engaged with our town halls, department meetings, et cetera, in the past few months. And many say meeting and Zoom fatigue is the reason.
Yes. So there are studies out there now that you can Google about why technology meetings are harder. We worry about the technology. It's another source of stress. Is my camera working? Do I look okay? Is my lipstick straight? What's going on with that thing in the background at somebody's house? All those things add to the problems. And the Zoom fatigue is real. It's starting to be studied a little bit. It's also because we're not physically with other people. There is literally a change in our brains, as I think I mentioned before, that happens when we're physically with someone. So we're not getting that source of energy, which is why the Zoom fatigues us. And there's so many distractions because nobody can really tell what we're doing. So it's so easy to not, then we're splitting our brain and doing what people like to call multitasking, which is not real. The brain does not multitask. You do one thing at a time, your brain's so quick at switching around that you think you're multitasking, and that's a different layer of fatigue. So you've got the blue screen element. There's 1,000 reasons that the Zoom fatigue is real. So using more bullet points on emails, using phone calls when it's just 2 of you, there's no reason for a Zoom. If you already know what she looks like or he looks like, just pick up the phone. That's a different layer of technology, a simpler technology. So there's no reason for the Zoom on that one. Allow people Zoom-free days. Say, we're going to have 1 day a week where nobody gets on Zoom for any reason unless that building is on fire. That allows for some time for people to decompress from all the technology too. And then the last thing is even doing a podcast, doing something that's vocal only, so they can just listen in their headphones for the information instead of having to get on the face-to-face Zoom. That's another angle you can use if you're just trying to communicate some information.
Thank you, Lisa. And then another question, probably the last question, we'll start wrapping things up. Can you clarify, Andrea Wright, good question. Can you clarify reward, engage, and win?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I like to say crew instead of team. It's something I started 20 years ago and I've just stuck with it. I like crew instead of team only because it denotes a little bit more seriousness. Teams are often games and business is not a game. So I like crew too, because I make a lot of analogies with ships and boats and that sort of thing, captains of ships. And so it just fits. But I created the acronym for clarify your message. That's the C is clarify. Because clarity has to be where you start. Your people need to know what's expected of them and why. You need to have a strategic plan, which only unfortunately 20% of American businesses have. There needs to be methods and processes and tactics and all these things. That's clarification. That's the communication part. Rewarding folks for the actual results instead of just the annual 3% raise. Finding ways to create rewards that actually motivate and inspire people for their own specific purposes and life. Engage is something you can read all about in a book called First, Break All the Rules. It's one of my very favorite business books. I call it my business Bible, First, Break All the Rules. It talks a lot about employee engagement, how to keep employees engaged, why they get disengaged and what to do about it. And that all leads, of course, to winning, which is having a good ROI about everything you do, getting good profit in your business, having people that are happy. Engagement has to do with that a lot. Also, employee retention, customer retention, and then, of course, your bottom line. So, can write to me if you want more.